Hello and welcome to the inaugural session of Informally Formal for the year 2021. Wishing everyone a very happy new year. I would wish for you loads of happiness, good health, and prosperity. We wanted to start this year with a very important topic, the health and well-being of the SME sector. We would be obviously concentrating on the SME sector in Bangladesh. To tackle this very important subject, we have someone equally important. He is young, he is dynamic, he is smart, and he has led many SMEs in Bangladesh. We are talking about none other than the newly elected president of Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Rizwan Rahman. A very, very warm welcome to you, Rizwan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. A very happy new year to you and your listeners and your viewers. It's actually quite humbling for me to be here today because I'm actually an avid follower of Informally Formal, and I'm also humbled that I'm being present among a very interesting group of speakers which have been interviewed in the past. And of course, thank you very much for having me here on the first day of the new year, and look forward to having a wonderfully informal session with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. Rizwan, as you know, we have aptly named our today's session DCCI, the voice of SMEs in Bangladesh. It's the largest chamber by many measures, and specifically for not only just the small and medium enterprises, as you know, the cottage, micro, as well as the small and medium enterprises in Bangladesh. So I'll just go into my first question, Rizwan, with you. What would you say are some of the big structural changes that we need to institute to, take advantage of what SMEs can do for Bangladesh?
MSMEs are actually the critical enabler of economic development in the developing countries. Now, they have played important roles in development process of Bangladesh as of now, but in the economic transformation process from LDC to developing economy, the MSMEs actually play a critical role. It's evident as a new paradigm to poverty reduction and desired economic growth. Now, the business ecosystem of the SMEs, it first of all needs to be improved and updated in line with the global practice, which you just mentioned, right? And all stakeholders supporting SME development like Bangladesh Bank, Ministry of Industries, Ministry of Commerce, the National Board of Revenue, and of course, us, the business community, and the entire financial sector. They have to be in agreement and extend cooperation for structural reforms to uniform SME financing system, integrating into our national financing mechanism. Now, the conventional policy of the SME is not comprehensive enough to immensely charter the SME development needs, or like including market access or development or SME graduation or the value chain linkage development, right? And then there's certain technological issues. For example, the technological attachment backed by smooth financing to make them ready to be competitive in the global context. Now, the policy of 2019 needs to be amended. This is my personal opinion, and changed into a full-fledged act addressing the overlapping issues in industrial policy. Now, the proposed act, it can bring in necessarily structural and institutional reforms for their market or inclusive SME sector development, and for this act, can act as the key and the guiding act for the SME sector. Now, there is a central SME data bank to locate and identify the nature of business and extend support to the government in any form, and specialized, we can have a specialized SME bank which can overcome the long-held and much talked about financing challenge in the SME sector. And then moving on, we have other policies and government regulations like export and import, including other relevant policies for the protection of the SME interest, and maybe avoid creating policy bias against SMEs to ensure balanced and uninterrupted growth. So that's something, again, the private and public sector needs to work hand in hand, because without that, it is sort of impossible to go forward and as a trade body. And in fact, as a proud SME owner myself, in fact, the company that I represent goes back to 1962. It has seen cottages in its own umbrella. It has seen micro businesses in its own umbrella, and then small, and then medium enterprises. And we are actually a group of CMSMEs, which puts us under a big umbrella. So I personally feel that these kind of linkages between the intergovernmental offices as well as the private sector is the key essential for the survival, and especially as we mentioned, after overcoming this pandemic context. We are only hearing what's happening in the textile sector, what's happening in the RMG sector, what's happening in the power sector, the big boys. It's the big boys club. But because we have no central database for the CMSMEs, it's very difficult to find out what's actually happening. For example, the stimulus package you're talking about, the distribution of this money to all these small businesses. But some of the small businesses have actually shut down and gone back to their villages, right? So those millions of people are back in the villages or out on the streets. And I think a large number has come quite below the poverty line. So this is something very difficult, because once you follow the ladder, you have to climb all the way back up, and it takes a long time. That is where I differ from the V-shaped to the U-shaped recovery. Some people say it might take longer, but again, I'm trying to be hopeful.
Right, right. Absolutely, absolutely. I had two other questions for you, Rizwan. One is some other broad stroke agendas that you have for DCCI's docket this year on your watch. That was one of my questions. And then of course, I wanted to ask you about, and some of these you're covering through our discussion here. And the other one was this COVID-19 situation. What do you see as overall business outlook for the world, and in particular for Bangladesh? So you have been kind of hitting on some of those in your discussions. So let's just keep that wide open. So I'll revert back to you, so for you to reflect on some more on what I just asked you.
Okay, so you mentioned about my agendas. I'll give you a brief idea. In fact, I think you will be the first one I'll be sharing this with. On the broad strokes, the key agenda, of course, I had my inauguration was on the 29th of December. So in my inauguration address, I said the economic recovery plan, the road to recovery is going to be in a three-phase stage. So it's going to be survive, revive, and thrive. So under those umbrellas, it's going to be different policies. Now, basically, the road to recovery is something we're considering. The current economic state is in the new normal situation in a pandemic context, right? So I would like to have focused agenda, keeping private sector revival in consideration, of course, export market revival, and then competitiveness backed by strengthening trade and economic diplomacy. And pro-business taxation system, including VAT Act reform. VAT Act reform is something I get calls for every day. Right now, I've been in office for 2 days, but that's something people want to work on, and most importantly, to increase the national revenue. And of course, subsequently, we need MSME-friendly industrial infrastructure. And then, of course, easy financing mix and mechanism for the sector, and local and foreign market-oriented industrial skills for development of employment retention. Employment retention is something we just don't look into. We just think about creating employment, but then that's it. But retention is also a very important phase of someone to excel in their career as an employer, not as an employee. If you can retain your employees, the most powerful resources you can have are your human resources. So I want, skills development should be a very important agenda for us. Digital attachment to local economic recovery to facilitate the fastest private sector recovery, and of course, reduce poverty in the long run, because we have, as I mentioned earlier, we just have a lot of people under the poverty line in the last less than a year. And above all, a post-pandemic-wise national protocol to keep pandemic effects minimum and industrial operations up, which is very important. Following countries, most importantly, I would say I was impressed by was Vietnam. Of course, Bangladesh has actually done very well than most of the developing countries and developed nations. No doubt about that. You've got to thank the government and give them their due credit. But yes, of course, there's always room for improvement. And moving back to how, the local economy actually contributes to 80% of the economic activities, and supporting led industries, above all informal sectors, are about 85% of the economic activities industries. Now, inclusive private sector led local economy revival would be indispensable. And my personal priority in the year 2021 to re-energize the economic growth and development. And if you want to assist the government, of course, which is our sole job from the private sector, and reshape, most importantly, the public health infrastructure, which has been in a lot of spotlights. And so they need to be under a system which is prepared to keep the pandemic lower as failure to containment of COVID and grossly foil our economic agenda ahead. So of course, there have been in a lot of bad lights, but anyways, that part is gone. I'm hoping that the second wave that we have been talking about is not going to be the new mutation that has been mentioned. I'm hoping it's not going to be much of a threat than it already was. The first 3 months, we had no idea what was going on. We were just taking it a day at a time. But right now, in the medical world, Bangladesh, I would say, is definitely well ahead of most of its neighbors, definitely. More importantly, some of the European countries, the United States, as you mentioned, we are doing well. We'll go ahead if we have the key economic agenda in mind and specifically emphasize on the public health infrastructure. And I think that this time there will be a lot of interest in new investments, or maybe FDI from pharmaceuticals, from healthcare or hospitals, you know the drill, and medical products, medical equipments, drugs, chemicals. These industries will see a new light. So that was one of the questions you mentioned about my broad agenda for the year. And also another interesting concept that we would like to introduce this time is indexing. DCCI would like to start the SME policy index in Bangladesh. Now, when it comes to index, all we think about is the World Bank or the World Economic Forum. World Bank is obviously doing the ease of doing business index, and of course we have been following that, and that actually has a huge impact on our FDIs. Same with the World Economic Forum, they have the competitiveness index. Now these two indexes are done by international organizations, but I am not entirely convinced on how in-depth research or attention they're giving to the little details when they are making these indexes. In that case, we as Dhaka Chamber would like to float our first SME policy index. We want to reach out to every door and create an in-depth report. I will try my best, my level best, to introduce it before the national budget so that this can have a lot of good impacts on these small and medium enterprises. So that will be also one of my major agendas. And of course, you wanted me to reflect on the COVID-19 situation earlier. And I would like to say that the outbreak has, of course, adversely affected our local value chain, and then trading network, industrial operation, private sector activities, private sector, small and even large businesses, of course. Large businesses, the employment actually has been very much affected. Job loss, extreme poverty, business closure, soaring inflation, lower export trade, cash flow inadequacy, which is something, every business, including myself, we're suffering from. But long story short, the foreign investment and destabilizing of the economic competitiveness is also affecting us. But the contribution of the formal and informal MSMEs have declined, and in massive, what we would like to call is a ripple effect. Now, that's why I would say our economy has underperformed in 2020, compared to the recent past years. But look at it this way, we still managed to get a good growth compared to our neighbors, you know. So that's something I would like to give the hats off to the government. Of course, this sector was obviously hit hard because of the COVID-19. Now, World Bank, if I'm not mistaken, it says that 46% of the SMEs in South Asia experienced a larger hit and literally closure in operation. So they're just shut down, they're gone. So that's also one of those effects. But I must say that our resilient economy, a stable macroeconomic management, remittance reserve, which we already have, and of course the brave private sector have shown strengths and leverage to secure that 5.2% growth. Very few economies in the world withstanding the COVID challenges, whereas IMF projected global GDP will be, I think, a negative 4.9%. And the World Bank's 5.2% contraction in 2020. So I think that's a big achievement. So in order to rest my case, I would like to say that the private sector is the frontier of the economy and is firm to progress the battle against COVID with relentless and policy support from the government. And I think with the firm leadership of the Prime Minister, commitment for policy and fiscal support, economic and private sector are going in tandem to endure the COVID implications and rejuvenations of economy, balancing lives and livelihoods. That's really important, you know, I mean, working hand in hand. And of course, it has triggered the deepest global recession in decades, this pandemic. And it's made contractions across a vast majority of emerging markets and developing countries. And those countries were really progressing very high. But of course, this is a once in a lifetime. I think it happened 100 years back. And what we have learned is to be prepared for the next 100 years. And this economic recovery is mapped and forecast earlier. V-shaped recovery, as I mentioned to you, it's not going to happen. It's going to be a very U-shaped recovery. So in a nutshell, this abnormality in the United States and the European Union may heavily undermine our future economic turnaround targets, because only if we heal Bangladesh, the story is not ending there. We need the rest of the world to heal as well. So I sincerely hope that, you know, at some point that's going to happen. And I truly look forward that the vaccine that is coming out already in Bangladesh through Serum Institute, the Oxford and AstraZeneca vaccine, it is done in a properly distributed channel, and it's very difficult to reach to the rural areas. This is something I think if they need help from the private sector, I think all trade bodies and organizations should take the responsibility and help the government, because this problem belongs to all of us. It's just not the government's responsibility. It's yours and mine, everyone, and our future.
Thank you very much, Rizwan. You have covered quite a bit, actually. Many of the questions that I was going to ask you, you kind of broadly covered pretty much the whole spectrum of it. Yeah, we're very hopeful as well that the vaccine, that is the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. Thank you very much, Rizwan. It was such a pleasure having you. And just for my audience, as I said in my opening remarks, you're someone that I hold very dear to me, not just as a good person, but as someone that I learned from as well. Very smart individual. So thank you for joining our show, ladies and gentlemen. It's been just a sheer pleasure. With a very, very happy new year to everyone. I close it out. So hope to see you very soon in our next session. Bye-bye.